This is the world's most traveled banknote. You probably have one, or you've held one, or you've spent one. But right now, at this exact moment, the overwhelming majority of $100 bills in existence are not in the United States. They are not in American wallets, not in American bank vaults, not in American cash registers. They are in Beirut, in Buenos Aires, in Islamabad, in Lagos, in Caracas, in Moscow, in places where people trust Benjamin Franklin more than they trust their own government. Let's start with the numbers, because they are, on their face, extraordinary. As of December 2024, there were $2,322.9 billion in U.S. currency in circulation, $2.3 trillion. In total, across all denominations, 55.4 billion physical notes exist. Total U.S. currency in circulation, $2.3 trillion, 55.4 billion notes. U.S. Currency Education Program, December 2024. Of those 55 billion notes, the single most common denomination is not the $1. It is not the 20, it is the 100. The $100 bill is now the most widely circulated denomination in American history, with 18.9 billion in existence. $100, 18.9 billion. 1, 14.5 billion. 20, 11.7 billion. $100 bill now number 1 for first time in history, more hundreds than ones, more Franklins than Washingtons. In a country where the average American keeps approximately $60 in cash on hand, and where contactless payments, Venmo, Apple Pay, and digital transfers handle the vast majority of everyday transactions, there are 18.9 billion $100 bills in circulation. Where are they all? The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago published a research paper that answered that question with a number that stops most readers cold. Nearly 80% of all $100 bills and more than 60% of all U.S. currency are held outside the United States. Source: Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago Research, confirmed by IMF Finance and Development, 2019. 80% of the most widely circulated American banknote outside America, up from roughly 30% in 1980. The share has more than doubled in 40 years, even as the United States became increasingly cashless. A typical Federal Reserve shipment to foreign destinations, processed through the Fed's cash office in New York City, which handles the bulk of international dollar distribution, is a pallet containing 640,000 bills, $64 million per pallet, loaded onto cargo aircraft bound for destinations that are never fully disclosed. The United States has been exporting its currency, its physical paper currency, on a massive and growing scale for decades. And the reason is not what most Americans would expect. "80% of $100 bills are abroad. But why? The answer begins not with crime, or as most people assume, but with something far more fundamental: with fear. To understand why $100 bills are hiding in walls in Caracas and buried under floors in Beirut, you need to understand what happens when a currency fails. Not theoretically, concretely, personally. In 2019, Lebanon's banking system began to freeze. Citizens who had saved their entire lives found their accounts inaccessible. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value within 2 years. Inflation hit 200%. A country that had once been called the Switzerland of the Middle East watched its middle class evaporate in real time. The Lebanese pound fell from roughly $1,500 per dollar in 2019 to over $90,000 by 2023, a near 98% collapse. What did Lebanese families do? The ones who could, they converted to dollars, and they kept those dollars in cash, not in banks, in their homes, in their cars. in safe deposit boxes they could access physically, because the banks had already proven they could not be trusted. This is not a new story. In Venezuela, annual inflation exceeded 1,000,000% in 2018. The bolivar became so worthless that citizens were literally using banknotes as napkins and wrapping paper. Today, Venezuela operates on an informal dual currency system. The official currency is still the bolivar. The real economy runs almost entirely on American dollars. Ecuador adopted the US dollar as its only official currency in 2000, after the sucre collapsed. In March 2025, Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa signed Decree 565 constitutionally enshrining the dollar as the country's permanent currency. The sucre fell from about 5 per dollar to over 21,000 per dollar by 2000. After dollarization, inflation dropped from roughly 96% to about 3.4% annually. Panama has used the US dollar since 1904. El Salvador since 2001. Zimbabwe abandoned its own currency and now uses a dollar-dominated system. Also, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Palau, Timor-Leste, British Virgin Islands. 11 sovereign nations have formally abandoned their own currency and adopted the US dollar. Dozens more use it informally. As a shadow currency, citizens trust more than their own government's notes. Fed economist Ruth Judson wrote that overseas demand for US dollars is driven primarily by its status as a safe asset. Cash demand, especially from other countries, increases in times of political and financial crisis. Every time a government collapses, every time a currency devalues, every time a bank freezes accounts, every time there is war, sanctions, or hyperinflation, somewhere in the world, ordinary people convert whatever they have into US dollars and hide them somewhere safe. The $100 bill is not primarily a tool of American commerce. It is a global insurance policy, purchased by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances against the failure of their own government. Fear drives the first wave of dollar demand. But there is a second wave, darker, larger, and far harder to measure. There is a second reason the world holds American hundreds, and it is one that U.S. government officials and Federal Reserve economists acknowledge carefully in academic language, but rarely discuss plainly. The $100 bill is the preferred currency of the global shadow economy. Harvard economist Kenneth Rogoff, who has written the most comprehensive academic study of global cash usage, has stated plainly that worldwide high-value currency notes are, quote, mainly used to avoid taxes and regulation and for illegal activity. Not exclusively, not always, but primarily. Economist Edgar Feige, writing in a Federal Reserve publication, noted that U.S. currency, particularly large denomination notes, is a preferred medium of exchange for clandestine transactions, drug trafficking, arms dealing, human trafficking, corruption payments, unreported income in every country on Earth. A $100 bill is portable. It requires no bank account, no identity verification, no digital trail. $1 million in hundreds fits in a standard briefcase. $1 million in ones would require a moving truck. The European Central Bank addressed this issue directly when it discontinued production of the €500 note in 2019. The ECB noted that the note had earned the nickname the Bin Laden in law enforcement circles, because, like its namesake, everyone knew it existed, but few ever saw it in legitimate daily use. The United States has faced similar pressure to discontinue the 100. Rogoff argued in his book, The Curse of Cash, that eliminating large denomination bills would significantly reduce crime, tax evasion, and corruption, with minimal impact on legitimate users, since most Americans rarely use hundreds for daily purchases. The counter-argument? The U.S. government earns significant seigniorage, the profit from producing currency, from every $100 bill in circulation. A $100 note costs approximately 14 cents to produce. The government collects $100 of value when it enters circulation. Every bill held abroad indefinitely is essentially a permanent, interest-free loan from the rest of the world to the United States Treasury. A $100 bill production cost, now 14, face value, now $100, profit per bill, FAO 99.86, multiply by 18.9 billion bills, roughly $1.88 trillion in permanent seigniorage. There is no serious political will to eliminate the 100. The economics are simply too good. Fear savings, shadow economy, and a third force, the largest of all, that explains why the dollar dominates not just cash, but the entire architecture of global finance. To understand why the world holds American dollars, not just in cash, but in reserves, in bonds, in trade settlements, you need to understand one of the most consequential geopolitical deals ever made. And it was made in the desert. In 1974, 3 years after Nixon abandoned the gold standard, the United States faced a crisis. The dollar's value, no longer tied to gold, needed a new anchor. Something that would force the world to keep demanding, holding, and trusting American currency. Treasury Secretary William Simon flew to Saudi Arabia. The deal that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. Other OPEC nations would follow. In return, the US would provide military protection and buy Saudi debt. The petrodollar system was born, and with it, a structural guarantee that every country on Earth that needed oil, which was every country on Earth, would need to hold US dollars. Graphic, petrodollar cycle. Country buys oil, pays in USD, Saudi Arabia receives USD, invests in US Treasury bonds, US government spends, cycle continues. The system created what French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing had already called an exorbitant privilege for the United States, a country that could, uniquely among all nations, print the currency that the entire world needed to function. Today, the dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency, held by central banks at a 58% share of all global foreign exchange reserves as of mid-2025, according to the Federal Reserve's own annual report on the dollar's international role. Graphic, global FX reserves breakdown 2025, USD 58%, Euro 20%, Japanese yen 6%, British pound 5%, Chinese renminbi 2%, all others 9%, Federal Reserve, July 2025. The dollar accounts for 88% of all foreign exchange transactions globally, 54% of all global export invoicing. When a Colombian exporter sells to a Korean importer, two countries with no direct relationship to the United States, they almost certainly settle the transaction in US dollars. Not because they want to, because it is the only currency both sides trust. As Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas economist Steve Kamen explained in 2025, quote, "A Colombian exporter might not want Korean won, and a Korean exporter does not want Colombian pesos, but both will accept US dollars." Over half of all countries in the world have their currencies anchored or pegged to the US dollar. The global financial system, SWIFT transactions, bond issuances, commodity pricing, trade finance, runs in large part on American currency. The $100 bill in a merchant's drawer in Kabul or a mattress in Caracas is not separate from this global system. It is the most visible, physical expression of it. It is the dollar's reach extending to the very edges of the global economy, into the places where the banking system has failed, where digital payments don't work, where trust in institutions has collapsed. There, At the margins of the global financial order, the $100 bill is not just money, it is infrastructure. The dollar is the world's operating system. But in 2025, for the first time in decades, that operating system is facing serious competition. And the implications for every American and every person who holds a $100 bill anywhere on Earth are significant. The dollar's dominance is real, its reach is extraordinary. But in 2025, something is shifting. The dollar's dominance is real, its reach is extraordinary. But in 2025, something is shifting. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has declined from 71% in 2001 to 56.3% in mid-2025, its lowest level since 1994. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has declined from 71% in 2001 to 56.3% in mid-2025, its lowest level since 1994. China has cut its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds from $1.3 trillion in 2013 to $682 billion by late 2025. Simultaneously, China has been buying gold for 11 consecutive months, adding to reserves now totaling over 2,300 tons. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now expanded to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, the UAE, and others, has publicly committed to reducing dependence on the US dollar for international trade. China and Russia now conduct the majority of their bilateral trade in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, now links over 4,800 banks in 185 countries. Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, stated in May 2025 that the current global landscape presents a significant opportunity for what she called a global euro moment, as investors, unsettled by unpredictable U.S. economic strategies, reduce their dollar exposure. And then there is the petrodollar, the 50-year arrangement that made oil the anchor of dollar demand. In 2025, 1 in 4 cars sold globally is electric. Industry analysts project that global oil demand will stagnate after 2026 and begin declining by 2030. If oil no longer requires dollars and the energy transition accelerates, one of the primary structural reasons for global dollar demand disappears. And then there is the petrodollar, the 50-year arrangement that made oil the anchor of dollar demand. In 2025, 1 in 4 cars sold globally is electric. Industry analysts project that global oil demand will stagnate after 2026 and begin declining by 2030. If oil no longer requires dollars and the energy transition accelerates, one of the primary structural reasons for global dollar demand disappears. None of this means the dollar is about to collapse. History suggests that reserve currency transitions take decades. The British pound's displacement by the dollar took nearly 30 years of relative decline after World War II. The dollar's network effects, its liquidity, its legal infrastructure, and the sheer inertia of a global system built around it are enormous. But the direction of travel is clear. The dollar remains dominant, and it is becoming slightly less dominant every year, which means this. The 18.9 billion $100 bills currently scattered across the planet, in mattresses, in market stalls, in central bank vaults, in the hands of refugees and merchants and smugglers and ordinary families trying to protect their savings, represent a bet, a collective global bet on the United States, on its institutions, on its rule of law, on its continued economic primacy. That bet is still being placed. But for the first time in a generation, some of those bets are being reconsidered by refugees, by merchants, by central banks, by drug traffickers, by families who don't trust their own government, by nations that have formally abandoned their own currencies, by a global global financial system that, for 70 years, has been built around the assumption that the American dollar is the safest thing on earth to hold. One bill, 14 cents to make, $100 of value, held in 80% of its volume outside the country that printed it, by refugees, by merchants, by central banks, by drug traffickers, by families who don't trust their own government, by nations that have formally abandoned their own currencies, by a global financial system that, for 70 years, has been built around the assumption that the American dollar is the safest thing on earth to hold. The $100 bill is not just American money, it is the world's money. It is the planet's reserve of last resort, its escape hatch, its shared language of value. And right now in 2025, for the first time in decades, the world is slowly, quietly, asking whether it needs a new language. The answer to that question will shape the global economy for the next 50 years. It will affect your interest rates, your purchasing power, your savings, your job, whether you live in New York or Nairobi, in Houston or Hanoi. And it starts with that single bill, cotton and linen. 14 cents of material. A portrait of a man who never became president. The most powerful financial object ever created by any government in human history. Subscribe to the Money Facts Lab. Leave a comment. Do you think the dollar will still be the world's reserve currency in 2050? I'll see you in the next one.